To make the most of this interactive session, please submit your questions using the chat feature or on our platform. Harold will be monitoring the chat and selecting a variety of questions for our panelists to address. And to our in-person crowd, please submit your questions on the card request. We highly encourage you to participate and ask questions, as this is a unique opportunity to engage with experts in LGBTQ+ rights, education, and civic engagement. Your questions not only help to deepen the conversation, but also provide a valuable opportunity to learn from one another and explore diverse perspectives. So, without further ado, let's dive into your questions and continue this engaging and vital conversation. We're looking forward to hearing from you and addressing your thoughts and concerns.
So one of the questions that we got online is, are there some ways that people can maintain a good balance between staying aware, being rightfully frustrated, and taking actions where they can, but also protect their mental health and well-being?
Yeah,
We all look at you.
right. Balance is hard. I know that all of us here are obviously interested in having a voice in these processes, and so I think any of us could attest to how we manage our own mental health. But I know for me, it's always about limiting how much time I'm spending getting news content, because it's just not even just LGBTQ. All of the content can be quite overwhelming at times, and so limiting those things, and taking time to kind of extract yourself from all of it, I think is really important. But then also talking to your community, I think is really, really vital, because there's so much around that is telling us that we're wrong, or that we don't belong, or that whatever we are hearing at all times. Talking to my community helps, because then I'm hearing the positive messages. And I think that's also really, really vital to maintain your balance, is to hear people telling you, no, you are valid, you are right. This is something we're doing together and you're not alone.
Yeah.
And some people look at self-care as like getting away from everything going on and doing things for the individual, but there's also community care that can be really powerful, where you engage with other people in spaces that empower you with information and ways to move forward, and that can be really restorative. And it's also a cycle. Like, balance is a little bit hard to reach, so I like to think of it as riding the waves. When we have legislative sessions, it gets crazy, but we have to make sure that we put time to rest on our calendars. It's a relay race, right? We have to hand the baton. When we're getting too tired, we have to recognize that and hand it out so we don't burn out. And it's a really painful lesson, because I think America preaches individual exceptionalism, right? Like, we as individuals are all supposed to save the world individually, but that's not how it's going to happen. So finding those community members that you can lean on and say, you know what, I need a couple days. Can you handle this for me, or update me in a few days when I get back from being on the beach for a couple days to relax? That's really important.
I think it's also important for us to really take care of our mental health individually. It is our own responsibility, especially if we're adults. It's important not to suppress the feelings that you're having. All feelings are valid. It's important to discuss this with a therapist, preferably not a first-time trans therapist like your experience was. So you can find therapists that can actually understand what you're talking about. There are therapists out there. I believe in therapy big time. Talk therapy, community therapy. I love the idea of community therapy, because then you're not isolating yourself. And when you're going through mental problems, you isolate. That's the first thing you do. So if you have a support system of like-minded people, or people can understand and respect your experience, that's really important. And I know that Transsocial does a lot of that. The McKinsey Project does a lot of that. Trans Inclusive, there are a lot of organizations that focus on that. So the resources are out there.
Yeah, and there are also many spiritual communities that are very gay affirming, and they're very queer affirming, and they're there to provide that space for community engagement, for community therapy, as Ashley said, which is beautiful. When I was a couple of years ago, before COVID, I was running a group that was a very open and inclusive group, and it had people from all walks of life. And I found that having people sit at a table together, sharing a meal, and just existing together was a great therapeutic moment for everybody to just be at peace for that 10-15 minutes. They were at peace, they were heard, they were seen, they were celebrated. And there are many community places that can do that, and if you can't find one, start one. You have friends, just invite them over to your house, have a drink, have some cheese, have some food, watch RuPaul, watch the movies.
Yeah.
Just take care of yourselves and take care of your community. And we all have that one friend that is the extrovert. We all know them. Let them lead it. They'll do a great job, and just support them from the sidelines. And that's how you build community. And this community engagement can then lead to political engagement as well. Like Aaron said, if you have 10 of your friends that put on the same T-shirt and you show up at a commission meeting, they will look at you. And what was it, Aaron? 15 or more, and they do what?
Something happens to their pants.
Yeah, I feel like therapy, it is like my queen right here said. Therapy and mental health is very big. Like, in order to go through anything, like, you have to take care of your mental health. And therapy isn't just sitting down, talking to the counselor or anything. It comes in many. I have a pet cat. That is my pet therapy. She's a lot, but it's like 1 a.m. in the morning. You can't call a therapist and say, "Hey, I need to talk." You got to talk to the cat. So it's like that's that. It can also be something you love, like drag. Like, I cheer. That is my getaway. Like, I'm very upset. Okay, now I can go to practice and just go to cheering and flipping and anything else I need to do to get my mind off of certain things.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like in this community, like the whole queer community, we must take care of our mental health.
Yeah. Therapy, besides talking to a professional, can also come in our artistic ways. Us queers are gifted with many abilities. We could put our mind to something and honestly build a house if we want to. So I think it's important to utilize what makes us special and unique. Relating to, in my culture, our queerness is a lot more than our sexuality or our gender expression. Our queerness is our gifts and our talents. So whether you are a shaman, a war chief, a leader, or just whatever role or society you have within your culture, or for your peers, that is your queerness, not necessarily who you lay with or what you like to wear. So definitely a therapy and all the sorts of sense. And as far as being aware and everything, how you take media, I haven't watched the news on TV ever since a certain orange Cheeto was on screen for a while, because I couldn't take the auditory and visual just effects of that thing anymore. So I decided all my news has just been me reading, whether it's a newspaper or on my phone. I can read the news. I cannot hear the news. I cannot watch the news, but I can read the news. So just your sense of media and how you take it in. Also maybe you need your friends to dish you tea time. It's not necessarily the most reliable source, taking it from a third party of your friend, but just be conscious of your sources.
I agree with you. I think we all can agree with that.
Yes. So next question is actually for Juan over here. And someone online has asked, were you treated differently when you started cheering at Barry?
I haven't given it to my coach. Her name is Sherry. When I first got there, I wasn't, the intention was not cheering. But one of my closest friends who I met there, she wanted to cheer. She was like, "Oh, let's try out for cheer." And I'm like, "Girl, do I look like a cheerleader to you?" And so she was like, "Let's do it." But me, I'm very cautious. So I'm like, "What if they make me put on some pants?" And so she was like, "Don't worry." She DM'd the cheer page and was like, "Oh, my friend to try it, but she don't want to put on no pair of pants, and she's trans." And the coach emailed back like, "I don't care if she want to put on a skirt, put on a skirt. I'm all for supporting who you are." And I tried out. I made the team. My coach made sure that I had this. It was like a spotlight, And I was like, oh my gosh. She was like, she treated me no different than the other girls. We were all sisters. She made it sure that anybody could misgender me. It was a consequence. On campus, she made sure everything was like A1 for me. It was the community and the family I literally had ever in my life. Like when because growing up, I didn't really have it. So when I got to cheering, those are like my sisters, those are my family, and those are people I will always remember. So no, I wasn't treated differently when it came to cheering from their wise. Now outside wise, I was very much like looked at, what, there's a boy cheering? Like, oh, why do you gotta go? And this year I became captain of the team. And it was just like, but at that point it was like everybody knew me. Like, what you say does not offend me. Like, I'm on the sidelines, you're in the bleachers. It doesn't, like, my impact is stronger than ever. So to all my other girls out there, you can do it.
Yes.
So we have a question from our in-house studio audience. Where do you see ally groups that we could work with to advance our interests? Where are opportunities to work together?
Well, I do know about Trans Social for sure. Pride Line, I'll give it to them. They have a lot of like great support there. Like I go there for hormones and Medicaid medical stuff and everything, and they have a lot of group projects and a lot of associations that reach out to help any queer youth or anything of that sort. But there's a lot in South Florida. You just gotta look around. It's definitely a lot. I do suggest Pride Line and Trans Social for sure. Like Trans Social, they host online or virtual like meetings where you can all meet together like as a sisterhood or as a space for you to just let go and feel safe and just vibe.
I find in my experience, as far as allies are concerned, I've created a lot of allies outside of the LGBTQ plus community because I think those allies, when they speak, they're really heard. And for me, I found the best thing to do is just be myself. The good, the bad, the ugly, no makeup, first thing in the morning, thank you. But I'm there for it. And I think people start seeing you as the human that you are. And then you create that connection, and then they're standing up for our rights.
Yeah.
So just be you. That's the one thing you can do 100% perfectly is being you. Shut everything else out.
And Aaron, you were about to jump in?
Yeah, 3 organizations that come to mind. One is Engage Miami, which is youth political and civic engagement, and they do tremendous work. They're extremely queer friendly and also work on housing and all issues that are of interest to young people, both in politics, on campuses. Engage Miami is one to look to. Another one in South Florida is Save, which, by the way, again, to the same point of if you show up, I know to you, you might be thinking, I'm a high school student or I'm a college student. What interest would Save, the sort of leading LGBT organization in South Florida, have in me? Let me flip the script. When you're like 4 now, when you're 34, 40, 50, if a high school or college student shows up, that's like the most exciting thing ever. Because all of us remember what it was like to be that age, and we're like, I wish I was doing that when I was your age. Like, trust me, you have so much. And if you show up with like 3 people, let alone the magical 10 or 15, you would be like the biggest rock star that's ever existed. So don't think, what interest do they have in me? If you want to step up, that's where you get started. Right? Save is a great place, as well as Engage Miami. And another where I lead our youth organizing program is Men for Choice, that educates, activates, and mobilizes pro-choice men. We run a fellowship for 18 to 25-year-olds, and that's like literally an explicit step of how you can learn to get guys who are doing nothing on the issue of reproductive freedom and controlling your own body. About a third of our fellowship is LGBT, obviously. I mean, I'm in charge, so it's pretty gay, right? And very, very affirming. But we see the way that choice, LGBT rights, everything else connects, and that's a great way to step up. But those 3 organizations, Trans Social, and there are plenty of others. But my biggest advice is, if you're interested, just show up. I know it's so easy. I spent so many years being like, I don't know. And I waited till I was in my mid-20s to really start showing up to things. And I just wish, that's why I do youth organizing now. I wish I started when I was younger, because you're so much more valuable and valued than you think you are. And they will be thrilled to see you, because you're like the unicorn. You're the young person showing up that they don't know how to access. And then you can do the rest. And you're like so valuable to them.
I think it's also, we've had a lot of success engaging employers that work in fields that require a lot of creativity. And they want to be affirming workplaces for LGBTQ folks, especially trans folks. And we're going to lose a lot of talent, and it's going to affect the business industry down here. And right, we know that our government only cares about money and power, right? So if we can hit them where it hurts in that money and hold businesses accountable for their political donations, and also make sure that they have non-discrimination policies that protect all of us, like that can be a really powerful thing that youth can advocate for. So.
Absolutely.
And also another great place to find allies to work with is find affinity groups or start affinity groups. I know I love Star Trek. I'm a big Trekkie. And I know that a lot of people who like Star Trek also have this pluralist mentality because that's what we're told in Star Trek. I like Star Wars too. I would love to get together with other people who like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, anime. There are so many ways that you can form groups that will bring in a multitude of people that are not just queer people. So that is another way to either join those that exist. I mean, every university has an anime group. Find an anime group if you like anime. Start a Star Trek group. They probably don't have Star Trek groups. That's fine. I accept that. Maybe I'll start one. But just find affinity groups that you can join and talk to other people because they're there for the same interest, and now you share something in common with them, and the conversations get a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that is all awesome information, and hopefully the audience looks those organizations up.
Yes. So we're going to move on to the next question. I am a university professor, and we are starting to organize about this. Not so much a question, but more of a statement. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I wrote that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
We can't hear you. I'm sorry. But yeah, sorry. We'll move on, but we'll talk privately afterwards.
Okay, sure.
I'm gonna ask another question from our online audience. As a teacher leading a high school GSA, how best do you think I should handle the rightful fears of our students? One was nearly in tears yesterday. It's heartbreaking.
I would invite some elders in to talk. We've gone in and talked to GSAs, and my husband Morgan is a trans man, and he's a little older, so he's got gray hair, and it's been really impactful for the youth to see themselves older, and in the world, engaging in the world, and to have a trans adult tell them, we're here to fight for you as we're fighting for ourselves, and it's going to be okay. So inviting some of these community groups and some of these leaders into the GSA to talk to the youth and let them see themselves reflected.
As much as I feel empowered being with a bunch of peers my age who are all like brown, black, and queer, and I feel invincible, and all that. What impacts me long term is my elders, whether they be my family or just my friends who have impacted me. Meeting the people who I've come from and meeting the people and sharing relationships with the people who have fought for me to have a better life on this earth makes me feel so much better. To know that I come from such great, beautiful people is what gives me the motivation to not only fight for myself, but also fight for my communities and my youth. To know that I myself can impact my own youth to feel more confident in their skin, whether they be girls or boys, because of my queerness, honestly, is such a privilege. But yeah, no, just my elders, my gay elders have just made my entire whole world.
I
I
think
want to jump to Aaron.
Yeah, 2 concrete steps. If you're in South Florida, reach out to Safe Schools South Florida. I mean, the reason I'm here and like skipping this other thing I should be doing is that Safe Schools South Florida was an absolute lifeline to my students. And I reached out to the executive director whenever I ran into problems or something, if something was getting sticky. And in this time, they have the know-how, they have a lot of things, right? So I'd say reach out to Safe Schools South Florida. And second, it goes off of the last 2 series of comments. But bring speakers. In the 3 years that I was sponsoring, we brought 16 LGBT adult speakers who are diverse in the broadest sense of the term, different career paths, different ages, different backgrounds. And one of the best pieces of advice I got that I acted on, and it was incredible, is that everyone wants to speak in a high school, and most people, if they get asked to speak in a high school, are like really honored and flattered, and most people just don't think to make the ask. We had 16 openly LGBT adult speakers. not one of the also that was 16 yes for yes. Right? like no one said no. The last speaker we ever brought was federal judge Darren Gales, who is the first openly gay black federal judge in American history, who's here from South Florida, and he was honored to come speak to the high school students. And we were able to have this federal judge, black man, come in his judge's robe and talk about what it was like in the isolation he felt and so on. And again, this was 2012 to 2016. So, maybe if you ask 16 people, you get 12 yeses now because there's fear and all that. Or maybe you get people who are even more motivated. But those speakers were tremendous and way more interesting than me and gave that sense of possibility and especially now kind of show that there's hope.
Thank you, Aaron. We have a next question from our audience. What is the impact of schools not complying? As an alumni, it is a matter of carrot and a stick. I donate if they protect students' rights. Do you advocate boycotts, like businesses who are anti-LGBT?
Yes.
We're all
We talked
looking at
about
you.
how money and power is the only way anybody
Yeah.
listens, and the best way to limit money and power is to not support them and not enter those businesses and not provide donations to those organizations. And so yes.
Yeah. And social media has become a tool and also a very destructive force in our nation. But at the same time, a lot of these businesses are on social media. So all you need to do is just get on there and just write a review. Write your opinions about it. Tag the business. Let the business know what they're doing and how what they're doing is affecting you as well. And that's a very easy way to do it. That is nonviolent resistance. That is something that we can utilize the tools that we have been given by Silicon Valley, and just try to reclaim those tools for good and not allow them to continue to isolate us and put us into these camps of us versus them. Because there are more of us in the center in this us versus them campaign.
Yeah, I think they hold the microphones, right? Like they're really controlling the narrative, and they're inundating our airwaves with all of this negative messaging. And I think it is important to see how much we can claim back. There really are a lot more people on our side than against it. They're just a lot louder right now, and it feels the other way around. But I was just really shocked by like the TikTok fundraiser that happened yesterday with raising money for Point of Pride. They raised like over $2 million for folks to access surgery. So like there is a lot of support for the community, and we just have to keep our focus on that.
Yeah. So next question. We're going to ask an online question, and this comes from Luigi Ferrer, who works for Florida Department of Health. Can someone address the rights of students on Florida schools to receive accurate, up-to-date sexual health education in their jurisdiction? We are the highest rates of new HIV infections in the country, right here in South Florida, and particularly in youth.
When I was in high school, we actually got like sexual education, and my teacher, she didn't go by the book. Like she went like full blown, like this is real, this is what's gonna happen. But like now, I have not heard of sex ed being taught like at all, and I just think like it should be like it helped me. I'm pretty sure it helped a lot of people, but like now it just feel like it's nothing that should be taught because they feel like it's not age appropriate, and I feel like everything can be taught within the age range. Like I can talk about something and keep it age appropriate to the certain audience, and I feel like that's something that like we wouldn't have this issue if we taught more sex ed classes. No, I'm not saying you have to go and just go and have sex. That's not what the class is for. This is to inform you, to help you. It's just like a advanced birds and the bees. Because if your parents don't talk about it, how would you learn? How would you know to protect yourself? How would you know that you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that? I just feel like it should be taught, but it hasn't been taught a lot.
This actually just came up for vote with the school board, and abstinence was what they were trying to push. And thank God there were a lot of activists in the audience that were speaking, and now they have to readdress that because that's not a realistic solution, especially in South Florida, where HIV/AIDS is on the rise, especially among our youth, 20 to 29. So people have to become educated in our high schools. So it's really important that education education saves lives.
I was a TA for a bio lab in undergrad, and we did a lab where we went through contraceptives and how they work and had the students kind of invent their own new contraceptive, and so many of them had no idea what we were talking about at all. They didn't know that you could get STIs from oral sex. They didn't know that you could get it like not just get an STI from oral sex, but in different parts of your body. And now I'm helping people in clinics with their eyes, and there are manifestations of herpes in your eyes, and people don't understand how that happens. And there are just so many ways in which there's just no knowledge about these things. And even if there was education in high school and before in middle school and such, it's not taken seriously, it's not really listened to, and it's all this surface level stuff that they just don't actually end up. It's scary images, so people turn it off and they don't listen. That tactic just doesn't work. As much as we know that abstinence only education doesn't work, fear doesn't work either. These things, they just make people turn off and start ignoring. So I think this education is really, really vital, because it's not just about, let's make sure we don't get pregnant. Okay, I'm not having sex that can get me pregnant, so I'm fine. But that's not the only problem here.
And just also like taking away all the stigmas and all the misinformation that happens. It's just like Aaron, when I first started to realize that I'm queer and I like guys, I thought that meant that I was automatically gonna get HIV. And not just HIV, but I went in my mind, I was like full-blown AIDS, like that's it, it's over. The moment that I have sex, that this is gonna happen and this will be, like this will end me. And I cannot tell you how many years I spent being so afraid of sex. It was just, it was, debilitating in many ways, because I couldn't live into the fullness of my queerness because I was afraid of it. And it wasn't until I met other queer men and I was surrounded by especially by older queer men, that I realized that a lot of what I felt was a fear tactic that was in place in me by my community, my Hispanic community, and it wasn't real. And and then thankfully I had this experience at a local church, and I was able to come into myself, and I was able to be more authentically me in my early 20s. But how many people are just denying themselves because of like false informations, or actually putting themselves at risk because of bad information? It's we have to find a better way to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
Our state government is just incredibly hypocritical in that they feel like teachers should have like a master's degree, right, to teach different subjects, but that parents should be responsible for teaching something so fundamental to like human expression. And so it's like, where's that line of expertise? And I grew up in a town that had the highest teen pregnancy rate. That was, and our sex ed was like a cartoon movie. That was it. And then moving into a more metropolitan area and being exposed to so many things, I was really behind in my knowledge of safety and consent and all those important negotiations that happen. So it's such a critical thing to be taught in our schools. And I also think that our government is in denial about age appropriateness and at what age children are actually starting to engage in different sexual behaviors. A lot younger than you think. And we have to stop putting our head in the sand and actually have destigmatizing conversations about this where they're empowered with real information.
Absolutely.
So we move on to another question. This is also from our audience online. South Florida has a huge Caribbean community. What connections or partnerships can be made to improve the quality of life of the LGBTQ community in the Caribbean?
That I feel like it's maybe a challenge, because I know a lot of Caribbeans, they don't really support queerness because of how they're raised, but you do have those that do support it. So it's like, if we could get like those people within that Caribbean community to like stand up and be like, hey, like, this is like, we just need to accept this. Like, it's always about like, sometimes it's like, I just want respect. Like, I understand you will not accept me, but just respect me. And if you show that respect, I feel like everybody would show the respect, and it wouldn't be so much of an issue as, oh, I hate this. This is against the culture. This is not what we stand for. But I feel like if we have more advocates within the Caribbean culture, the Caribbean culture would definitely support us more.
So, and I want to piggyback off of your point. I think someone earlier said each one teach one, and while there are a lot of issues that are currently occurring in Florida, there have been many advancements within the United States itself, especially in comparing them to the countries within the West Indies. And I think just lending a helping hand, reaching out and making the connections to the groups that are within those communities, teaching them whether it's advocacy, civic engagement, and how to bring further awareness to the general population about the existence of queer lives. I think that would actually be a great system.
Speaking very rash and very bold, I know my POV on this is a little pointed, but I feel in my hearts of hearts that gay men in America who are over 18, not living with their family, have a privilege that exists here in this country that doesn't exist around the world. And I feel like it's up to us as queer people in America to support our family outside of America who aren't as privileged to be so expressionable, just so free out in public. It shocked me when I learned that Italian gay boys were being beat up in the streets just for going out and having dates. The images shocked me. And personally, I know that my freedom in this country comes from trans women who gave their lives for me to be able to be so outward. So I feel a due diligence to be so bold and so self-loving, because I know that my self-love and me being my authentic self is in support to those who can't be so free and true to themselves. So that's my pointed POV.
It's interesting that this came up. I'm a member of the Dolphin Democrats, and we had a meeting, and there were different people in different sessions that gave questions, and that was the exact same question that came up. So I think it's on our community to create programs that are inclusive. It's really important. And again, I go back to the HIV/AIDS issue. It's projected that by the year, I think 2030, 1 in 2 Black men in South Florida will be HIV positive. Let that sink in for a moment. That's a lot. So we need to make sure we embrace everybody and make sure we create programs that are inviting to everybody so everybody feels included. And that's also why it's important to teach sex education in schools, how to protect yourself, because this epidemic is blowing up again here in our own backyard.
Go ahead.
My only point, I just want to say, also highlighted for me, one of my highlights in sex education was about rape culture and the fact that, you know, when you're out partying as an adult and you're inebriated, to not. So I feel like also another important part of sex education is the openness to what you can learn of what and when, how to be with somebody, what is consent, and learning what consent is, because consent is very important for everybody, no matter what your background.
I have a little bit of, I forgot what I was going to say, but I want to say that the current lifetime risk for a Black trans woman in Miami is 1 in 2. So we're already there in the Black trans community, and it's overlooked a lot because it's lumped in with the MSM category within the health department. So we've been trying to do a lot of advocacy around that, but it's not there yet. But we also have to think about language justice, especially in South Florida. A lot of materials aren't translated well into Spanish or Creole or some of the common languages down here. And there's also like that cultural angle that we can't create cookie cutter resources for the community. We really have to be culturally competent if we're going to reach out to different communities and include them in a meaningful way.
It's interesting you brought up the HIV in the trans community. I'm also part of the Broward HIV Planning Council, and we've had this discussion. So I've been on that committee, System of Care Committee, for a year now. And I was looking at all the different numbers. And for South Florida, for Broward, the number I think was 54 HIV positive trans women. And I'm like, that can't be right. And then we have a lot of things with our gender identity and how do we reach these groups? How do we reach these groups to make sure they're getting the care that they need? It goes back to the schooling as well. And what you said was really great. What is consent? What is healthy?
And I think that so many of our resources are stuck in the center of a city when the biggest need is outside of Miami, outside of downtown Fort Lauderdale. And this is where really virtual options and just for us to be creating platforms that give ease of access to information in multiple language is so important. And speaking from Safe Schools South Florida, that is something that we are actively working on. We will actively try to do and partner, really create partnerships that we can have these resources more easily available and in the language of their choice, and specifically for parents. I mean, I can tell you, I had such a hard time finding resources in Spanish for my parents when I was coming out. It was all in English, and they don't read English. They just don't. I mean, my dad does, but my dad wouldn't read it. And my mom, she would read it. My grandma would read it, and there's just nothing out there for them.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to another question, and this one comes from our audience here. Like the Miranda rights are there to exist to protect us. Is there anything that we can use? Are there any laws that we can use to protect us from having to give our private information out to the universities, or if requested, is there anything that exists for that?
My favorite is the Fifth Amendment.
I think specifically, and we sort of addressed it earlier, and I think it was Francesca, the government requested some health information from a lot of the state universities, but it was specifically meant to be supposed to be anonymized. And so they did it in a way to get past the laws in that instance. And I'm not a legal professional, so when it comes to diving deep and finding, specific laws or avoiding loopholes,
Right.
I think that that's probably something that a lot of the different organizations within the community can maybe think about more as we're looking at a multi-pronged approach on how to tackle this issue.
And part of the transgender student, from my experience, I was transitioning while I was completing my education. So of course I had to make that information known to the university so that everything got changed and reflected. So that becomes a slippery slope as well.
And I love the ideas that the youth have around like messing up the systems. So what if 80% of the student body requested information on HRT? Then the data they have is useless, right? So how can we muddy the systems that they set up to collect this information about us that they really shouldn't? Like, it should be protected, but how do we ensure that if they do get a hold of it, it's unusable? I like that method.
They call it malicious compliance.
Yes.
And just working together, and I keep saying this, but this is actually like in Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Where Do We Go From Here? One of the main things that he said is that we need to be creative gadflies and just buzz around them, just constantly resisting, constantly finding new ways to resist what is being asked of us. And as leaders of nonprofits and students, we have the calling to find creative ways to resist, to find ways that we can come together as a community and say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give you our information, and what can we do? What legal route do we have to protect ourselves? And we need to find queer affirming lawyers, like just get more people on these conversations, because that's the only way that we're going to survive this.
Absolutely.
And we have some other questions here. What is the best way to get our political leaders to care more about these issues and to be allies in the movement? And I would love to hear more from Erin about this, since you have a lot of words about this, Erin.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is there needs to be representation in office. So I serve on the campaign board of the Victory Fund, which is the largest organization in the country that exclusively focuses on electing LGBT people to public office. And right now, like we have State Senator Chevron Jones. And even though, Chev on his own, Senator Jones on his own is not enough, it is unbelievably powerful to see him go up there and give testimony while they're attacking and dehumanizing us, for Senator Jones to be able to say, this is what I remember when I was a kid. This is what you're doing to the people that I represent. This is what you're doing to people like me. And if it wasn't working, they wouldn't feel so threatened by it, right? There was an openly gay Hispanic state rep in Central Florida named Carlos Guillermo Smith, who they spent something like $5 million going after him because he was such a threat to have him be able to speak and be in the state legislature. And there are a few others, Michelle Rayner, in St. Petersburg. And so it's important to have those people. And if you want to get involved in those sorts of races, again, come volunteer. There's a lot fewer people involved than you think. That's a great way. And if you're not, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So you need to have those people in there. The second thing, and I cannot stress this strongly enough, is that if we feel together rather than alone, we have much more power than we think. People who are disconnected do not have political power. People who are together do. I learned a great lesson from a professor of mine, a mentor of mine, who was heavily involved in the civil rights movement. And he used to say, in the civil rights movement, the realization, if you look at a place like Birmingham, Alabama, was that people could turn their feet and their time and their $1.25 bus fare pooled together into power. That enough people choosing not to use that in service of getting on the public bus and boycotting that public bus after a year turned people who were individualized into collective power. And that realization can be applied in so many ways. And I'm convinced that a big part of what they're trying to do is make you feel like you're whatever, feet, voice, $1.25, whatever individual things you have cannot be pooled with other people, and it's not worth trying to get involved in the process. It really is. And like I said, 10 or 15 people is more than enough. You showing up is a starting point. And the last and final thing is to use your voice in whatever ways is safe and possible, because what they are doing is they're lying about this, right? They put it in a way that sounds very reasonable, and they say, "Oh, drag queens are sexualizing children." They are not, right? That is not what that's about. But then, people don't know a drag queen. It kind of sounds reasonable-ish, and then that sort of story fills the void, right? Fills the lack of knowledge that person has with something that's a lie, which can be punctured by a person speaking the truth, right? For all of the crazy things about trans people, if someone were actually to listen to Vaughn for more than 5 minutes, it becomes immediately clear that those sorts of lies aren't true. And this is just who people are. So I would say, make sure that we do have people in public office who can speak for the community, to get involved if that feels important to you. And the final thing is to use your voice in whatever way you can, which is another sort of on-ramp to get involved. And with that, I'm so sorry, but I actually was supposed to leave at 1, and I'm gonna get in a lot in trouble, but the panel was so good and everyone was so good, and you all, this is so important that I stayed. But the time has come for me to sashay away, and I'm so sorry to be leaving early, but I'm probably gonna get docked like an hour and a half of time. It's like being a student again. I'm skipping class, but I'm so glad to be here. Thank you all for fellow panelists, and if I can be useful, I don't know if you're allowed to get my contact information or whatever, but if I can be useful, I will, because they're coming after you, not because you're weak, but because you're strong. Good to see you all.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Lara are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.